and welcome to the first episode of the Let Me Add to That podcast. My name is Elizabeth Graswich, and I'm the Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, the nation's largest education agency serving 80 school districts and nearly 2 million children. I am very excited to use this platform to take a deep dive into the conversations surrounding our students and schools in LA County. I'm here today to talk about attendance and dropout prevention. I'm here with our Los Angeles County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Debra Duardo.
Hi, Liz. Glad to be here.
Wonderful to have you here today. And Dr. Duardo is joined by Alicia Garoupa, who is our Chief of Wellbeing and Support Services.
Hello. Very nice to be here with you all.
We're here today to talk a little bit about dropouts and attendance and what we can do to improve those in our schools. So really, we want to start with setting the stage a little bit. And I'd like to ask you to help describe, what we're seeing. We're hearing a lot about the term missing students, students who have dropped out, who are not going to school anymore. And I know that's very much tied to attendance. So if you could speak a little bit to what you're seeing out in our schools.
Absolutely. So I can start off. We know that declining enrollment has been an issue in our state for quite some time. Unfortunately, part of what we've seen through the pandemic is an acceleration in the declines in enrollment in our schools. So much so that our state superintendent of public instruction has established a declining enrollment task force, aiming to try to understand better where our students are going and some of the patterns and trends around the declining enrollment that is happening across the state.
Yeah, and if I could add, one of the concerns we have when we talk about declining enrollment is really solving a mystery. So the number of students attending our schools have declined, but where have they gone? Have they gone to another school district? Have they gone to another county? Have they gone to another state? Have they left the country? Or in worst case scenario, are they not attending school at all and have they dropped out? So it's really trying to solve that mystery and identify what's going on in LA County and across the state, identifying where those students are. And right now we know that the numbers don't add up. So we know that there are students that have stopped attending in LA County, but they haven't showed up anywhere else in the state. So we're trying to figure out, where did those students go and how do we make sure those students are not just at home and not attending school at all. So that's a real critical point for us.
Absolutely. And I can add to that. I know there's a real significant trend around TK and kindergarten. We've seen the largest losses among our youngest students. And some of the patterns that I think are starting to come to light include people moving to other parts of the state where there is a lower cost of living. Places like Los Angeles County are expensive for families, and there are other parts of the state where if you're remote working or there are job opportunities, it is a lot less expensive to raise a family.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Alicia, because what we found when we look at the data, that across LA County, we have a 17% decline in enrollment, which is different than at the state level. But what we've also noticed is different is that we've lost at higher numbers our African-American students, our Latino students, students living in poverty, which tells us that for some of those students and families, it's just too expensive for them to live in Los Angeles, and they're choosing to move to an area where the cost of living isn't so high.
Yeah, but to your point, Dr. Duardo, the other concern there is that in some cases, we know that students may be working, they may be home taking care of younger siblings, or that some of the isolation that came as a result of the pandemic may be keeping some of our students home as well. That is one of our big concerns.
Yeah, and I think that people aren't thinking about that enough. That 3 years of a pandemic and the challenges and the grief that our children and families have experienced is playing a significant role. Their lives have been disrupted. Many of our lower income families have lost parents or close family members. Many children were forced to take care of younger siblings because their parents were essential employees. So there are many, many things. And then on top of all of that is the overall crisis when it comes to mental health of our youth. So it could be that even as we're coming out of this pandemic, children are still not feeling comfortable going back to school, may have anxiety about coming back to school, may have had to work to help the family and are now working during the day. And those are the things that we need to think about and come up with some solutions in terms of how we can ensure that we are, one, identifying where these children are, and if in fact they are not enrolled anywhere in school, offering them some options about how they might be able to come back to school.
We use different terms, dropouts, we use attendance, chronic absenteeism. They're all different terms, but they relate. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So chronic absence, according to the state of California, is missing 10% or more of enrolled days in school. So a typical school year for a student enrolled all year is 180 days. So chronic absence equates to having 18 or more absences, right? So which is a little over 3 or more weeks of school missed. And unfortunately, we know in many cases it's many more than 3 weeks of school for students. So that's chronic absence. Your other question was regarding what does it mean? So I think that the common definition is that a student who's separated from school without completing school, just sort of high level. The state does track those numbers. We have a cohort graduation rate, and students who have left, there are different rules that relate to where they've left to that determine whether that student's going to show up on a school district's dropout list, and that's in essence where those students are identified.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, the thing that we know is that when children stop attending regularly, they're more likely to end up dropping out of school. So there's a difference. First, children stop attending, and that's when you see chronic absenteeism. And the reason why it's so important that we address absenteeism early on is because we know that the more children miss school, the more they're not learning, the more they're falling behind, the more likely they are to not pass their classes and then to end up becoming a high school dropout. So that's why absenteeism and the graduation rate or dropout rate is so connected, and attendance is such a critical thing that we take a look at to make sure that children are attending school regularly.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, maybe sometimes we think about absenteeism, for example, of high school students, but what we know, from research is that this absenteeism often starts in our very youngest grade levels, right? So again, transitional kindergarten and kindergarten are really early signs of that a student may be struggling, or and that sort of weak foundation that comes from high levels of absenteeism in early grades really has an impact on later academic achievement. For example, chronic absence in TK in kindergarten, even if the student starts attending regularly in first grade, second grade, third grade, there's still evidence oftentimes in test scores, reading levels, et cetera, for those third graders, which again translates to performance kind of throughout. And unfortunately, our system is set up for social promotion. So in many cases, students are academically struggling even if they continue to attend and are enrolled in school. When they reach high school, that lack of academic preparation catches up with them, and unfortunately, those students many move toward dropout because they no longer are being socially promoted. They need to earn credits to pass their classes in order to graduate from high school. So I think one of the things that I know Dr. Duardo has been a real leader in is absence prevention, right? And that really does start with our very youngest children. To ensure we're giving them the strongest possible foundation.
Yeah, so in other words, when children miss a lot early on, sometimes even when they come back to school, they can never quite catch up because they've lost such a critical time early on in their instructional program that even when they start attending regularly, it's difficult for them to ever catch up.
You both have extensive professional experience related to attendance and dropouts. And Dr. Duardo, this is actually very personal for you as well. Can you speak a little bit to that, your story, and how that led to your professional experience?
Absolutely. So, when I was in junior high school, I was a great student, attended regularly, and then during that transition from middle school to high school, it wasn't a good transition for me. So early on, I realized I don't really like school so much. Was offered a job full time during the day, and I didn't hesitate a moment. I said, I'm going to take it. So I just stopped attending school after being in high school for a very short period of time to start working full time. And I think for me, that really changed a lot in my life. Dropping out of high school, I ended up becoming a teen mom, struggling, financially. If you don't have a high school diploma, or now it requires even more than that to be able to make a decent living, made my life much more challenging. So I absolutely, because of my own experience of dropping out of high school, I think it's critical that we're doing everything that we possibly can to identify which children are struggling, making sure that we're re-engaging them. If they've left school, doing everything possible to bring them back and to make sure that they have multiple options to continue their education. But even as Alicia said, more importantly, it's not waiting until children drop out of school. It's doing that early prevention work, that early identification of identifying students that are struggling, maybe are withdrawn, maybe are having some challenges in their home life or problems at school, and addressing that so that every child feels safe at school, a sense of belonging in school, and really looking at what we can do universally, right? So all of our schools should be set up as places that have a culture and a nurturing environment where, as I said, there's a sense of belonging, where they get first strong, good quality instruction, where they have options, they have art programs, they have sports programs, they have things that they enjoy, that people around them show compassion and concern for their well-being. And when you have those things universally at a school, there will still be a small percentage of students that are going to need some additional support. And it may be because they're going through a divorce in their family, or a death in their family, or some other challenge in their home life, housing, healthcare. And so for those students, we need to identify them and make sure we're giving them additional support to ensure that they continue coming. So it really is looking at a tiered system of support, but the bottom line is we have to make sure that universally that our schools are safe, welcoming, nurturing environments where children want to attend and learn.
And you felt so passionately about this subject that you actually did your dissertation for your doctoral degree in around attendance, and then that led to ultimately a career at LAUSD where you were really focused on that. And I believe that's where the two of you met originally and did some work together. Can you speak a little bit to the work you did in LAUSD? I think some of the programs that you worked on are actually still in place today and have been adopted nationwide.
Yeah, coming to LAUSD, I started off as an attendance counselor. So my work was really focused on making sure children were attending school regularly, doing home visits, connecting with families to better understand why they weren't sending their children to school. But as I moved along in my career and became an administrator and a leader in this work, we implemented many programs to improve attendance. We had a attendance improvement program where we targeted our children that had the highest rate of chronic absenteeism, which was our kindergarteners and our ninth graders. But the other important work that we did in LAUSD, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm proud that LAUSD continues to lead in this area, is we developed a system of collecting data and really analyzing data to help us understand what the challenge is. Because the first thing that you need to do to address a problem or solve a problem is to understand what the problem is. So we collected data looking at who was having problems with their attendance? Who are the children that were most likely to miss school? What grade? What ethnicity? What gender? What to really understand. And again, that's how we identified it was our kindergartners and our ninth graders that had the highest rates of chronic absenteeism. We also identified that they were our African American students starting in kindergarten had double the rate of chronic absenteeism. So it was a real concern. And then identifying solutions that would target that student population and do everything possible to make sure that we were meeting the needs of the students and families that weren't attending regularly.
Yeah, and I can add to that. I know Dr. Duardo was also a leader in the creation and sort of implementation of our Student Recovery Day efforts, which was a work that the folks in child welfare and attendance do in school districts every day. LA Unified's fortunate to have a whole workforce around pupil services and attendance. Not all districts do, but the work of re-engagement, following up on a child who's absent, not just by making a phone call, but by going out and visiting the family, trying to find the child during the school day, not at school, and working to identify and address barriers and re-engage. The Student Recovery Day was a way of lifting the efforts of the child welfare and attendance professionals and involving other district personnel in the community, kind of communicating the message that attendance really is everyone's responsibility. We all need to be engaged in keeping our kids in school and re-engaging them when they leave. So I think that's work that really we have seen a trend and an increase in focus on the ability for school professionals to go into communities. Unfortunately, there were times when, we drive in and out of the neighborhood where our kids live and our families, and we may never walk the places that they walk. And I think that's a real loss. We can build so much stronger community when we walk their path to school and when we visit their homes, and not just to say, hey, this is a problem, but to try to connect again and build relationships and offer supports and let that student and their family know that we miss them and that we want them at school.
Yeah, and I would just add to that what Alicia just said about involving the entire school community when a child is chronically absent. Whenever you see real success in improving attendance, it's because everyone is taking ownership of this problem. If some school or district thinks that's only the attendance counselor's problem, I'm not really going to focus on that because I've got too much other stuff on my plate, it's not going to work. It has to be starting with the superintendent, making very clear that that is a issue that is a priority, that they're going to focus on, using that data district-wide and analyzing it to address where the problem is, not only who's not attending school, but is there certain areas of the district, certain parts of the city or the county where children have higher rates of chronic absenteeism, and then tracking that data and setting very clear expectations around what the target is. We're going to increase this by X amount by this date, and making it clear that everybody is going to be held accountable to that, not just the attendance counselor, but the school classroom teacher, the administration, the principal, the district level staff, that everybody is going to be held accountable to making sure that this is a priority. And I think that's when you see real differences happen, is when everybody is held accountable and understands that they have a responsibility when it comes to improving student attendance.
Yeah, and there are a few items I was thinking of adding here. Another thing that LA Unified did, and over the course of my 20 years in child welfare and attendance, I think we really made a shift around compulsory education and sort of compliance or law enforcement sort of approach to our engagement with families. And a great example of that is another, set of programs that Dr. Duardo helped launch, the Family Source and Youth Source partnerships with our city, where, families, youth who were identified as truant would not be cited, but instead would be referred to diversion, where they would meet with a pupil services and attendance counselor and, do an assessment of kind of what's going on and wrap support around that student and their family. So I think that's an important shift as well. Is that this is not a tug of war we want to play with families. This is really about creating the conditions that our students deserve, and as Dr. Duardo said, a place where students and parents are kind of knocking at the door to get in, because there's just so much good stuff happening there, right? That there's joy, there's connectedness, there's a sense of belonging, and again, I in my own experience at a school. Oftentimes we would say with kindergartners, for example, oh, well, that's on the parent, right? If they're not coming to school, it's because the parent's not doing something. When you have really good systems and programs in place, that kindergartner will get their parent up to get them to school. I've seen it happen. So I know that that there are powerful motivators that relate to that, again, those relationships that we build, that, again, we are problem solvers, but ultimately this is about our kids being in seats and getting access to the best possible education.
And I would just add to what Alicia was saying about when we're working with children and families, I really believe that offering resources and supports are the solution. I don't believe that taking a punitive approach and threatening to take a parent to jail because they're violating the compulsory education laws is going to get them to change their behavior. When behavior is changed is when families and students believe you genuinely care about their well-being and you're there because you want to help them, you want to understand what the barrier is, what the challenges they're facing, and you want to offer support and assistance. I have never in my 30 plus years in education have ever met a parent who didn't want what was best for their child. Oftentimes they were confused about what was best for their child, or they needed some guidance and assistance or parenting, but they want what's best for their children. And so to develop that kind of caring relationship with the parent that says, I'm here to help you because I care about you and I care about your child, is going to change the behavior for the better. And that's what's really important. But I think what also we need to look at, and going back to enrollment, and not just chronic absenteeism, is there's a lot that districts can do, right? And in terms of the policies and practices that are in place in their systems. One, for example, is making it really easy for a family to enroll their child and not putting up any barriers. And there have been times and places where a parent will come to enroll their child in school and, the school first person at the desk will say, oh no, I need a birth certificate, I need proof of residence, I need, X, Y, and Z, come back and we'll consider enrolling you then. Or some districts might say, oh no, you have to go to our district office to enroll your child. You can't do it at a school site. So we have to make it really easy for parents to enroll their children and never turn a family away when they're ready and able to enroll their child, even if it means we're going to enroll you right now because we want to get you started, and there's some documentation and things that we're going to need that we can collect afterwards. So those are examples of enrollment, but there are also policies that actually increase poor attendance. And I'll give you some examples of that. And that has changed a bit, but we used to suspend children for behavioral problems, and in some places we still are. And when you are suspending a child, that's just a district-induced absence, right? It's just saying, okay, you've acted inappropriately, you stay home, where oftentimes children are left home unsupervised, get into more trouble, or they just might feel like, I don't want to go back to that school that doesn't want me there. So looking at our discipline policies and making sure that we're not pushing kids out of school. Also, just really simple things like looking at our school calendars, right? Like we know that Mondays and Fridays are the worst attendance days. So making sure that on Mondays and Fridays, we don't have any pupil-free days if possible, because if or especially like on, if you have a pupil-free day on a Thursday, you can, see that the attendance is going to plummet because the family or a kid's going to say, oh, we have Thursday off because it's pupil-free, so you might as well just, take it, to the rest of the weekend, have a long weekend. And there are a lot of things that you can do around the calendar to make sure that you're improving how often students attend school.
Yeah, and to add to that, we know about the Mondays and Fridays. Before and after holidays, you're going to tend to have drops. Rainy days, right? In Los Angeles, for some reason, rain is like we're allergic to it. There's something about that. If you put incentives in place and students know that positive things are going to happen on rainy days, those are strategies that can be helpful. Also, generally, pre-pandemic, attendance tended to start really high at the beginning of the year and then sort of declines as the months go on, which sort of makes sense. So in winter months, we would tend to have lower attendance. So when you're able to look at that data, as Dr. Duardo said, and really identify patterns, because there very much are clear patterns in the data, you can put strategies in place to help promote attendance and prevent absenteeism.
The Los Angeles County Office of Education is unique. We support 80 school districts, nearly 2 million children. We're the largest educational organization in terms of region in the nation. So what are some of the things that we are doing as an organization to support the 80 school districts, if not California or the nation, in best practices?
Yeah, so I would say start, of course, first best instruction. There are a lot of programs that LACO operates that are supporting, improving teaching and learning in general. But when it comes to things like child welfare and attendance and support services, I think, the creation of my position, the Chief of Wellbeing and Support Services, bringing in sort of an additional focus in that area. We've been able to invest in an expanded child welfare and attendance support structure, which are, those professionals who help districts create those tiered systems of support, look at their data, identify an approach to promote attendance, prevent absenteeism. So that team is being hired. We're in the process of sort of onboarding that expanded support that we know districts have been hungry for, to support them in putting systems in place, especially as we're kind of in the middle of hopefully coming out of the pandemic. Chronic absence has been an ongoing struggle for districts in a way that really, is unprecedented. We know that, many districts had 30 to 40% of kids last school year still struggling with, you don't come to school if you have the slightest sniffle, you were a close contact, isolation, go home. That in many cases that, it really caused a tremendous increase in chronic absence, so that 30 or 40% of kids in many districts have been chronically absent in the last school year.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Alicia said around creating systems and really leveraging existing resources throughout LA County. And that means us as the LA County Office of Education partnering with other county departments. So we work very closely with the Department of Mental Health, obviously the Department of Public Health throughout this pandemic. We work closely with the Department of Children and Family Services, the Department of Public Social Services, parks, libraries, really anybody that serves children and families, to say, we are all serving the same children, the same families. We need to work together and develop system that will best support our students and families. And one example of that is the community school model. And the community school model is really looking at schools as community resource centers, where a school community will come together and identify what they need. What are some of the barriers in services or some of the challenges that they have in their school and in their community, whether those challenges are related to instruction or whether they're related to housing or healthcare or other mental health issues where they may need support. So really having and empowering students and parents to tell us what it is that they need, what types of supports, and then partnering with all of these different partners to offer those services at school, where there is so much evidence that tells us that children are much more likely to access the services and supports if they're offered at school, because schools are trusted places where parents and students feel safe receiving services. So making sure that we have those types of partnerships, that we're leveraging existing resources, and that we have the support of our county departments and our nonprofits throughout the community. And we're really fortunate in LA. We've had so much support, especially from our Board of Supervisors, that have really said we are going to invest in children and in schools, and have given millions and millions of dollars to our community school model, to our closing the digital divide and making sure students have access to devices and internet access. I mean, those types of partnerships are critical. And one other thing that we're doing now is we're working with the managed care providers to make sure that there are infrastructures set up in our schools to ensure that they can help us with providing services and supports to children. So we're not saying that schools have to do everything, that they have to be the only ones addressing all of the ills that our children and families face, that we need to partner with others who need to come to the table and say, we are all going to invest our time and our resources in making sure that children and families have the services they need in order to thrive, to be healthy, both physically and emotionally, that their basic needs are being met so that they are able to attend school regularly.
And I'd like to add to that. I was thinking, as Dr. Duardo was talking about, how through partnerships and other efforts we're promoting an improved school climate in general. And again, that's work that the County Office of Education takes a leadership role in. What are strong and promising practices that are going to promote the kinds of school climates where all students want to attend, and what kinds of programs, what does that look like? Also, a lot of work around, diversity, equity, and inclusion, acknowledging that there are disproportionalities in absenteeism and that some of that relates to the ways in which our schools are responsive to very unique, diverse, and incredibly powerful, culturally and linguistically different communities that make up our whole county. So I think, that's a great gift, but it does present challenges for schools if we're not adaptive and sort of personalizing what we're doing. Another thing that we're really proud of is sort of efforts around creating more well spaces. We've got a lot of districts that are seeking to create, physical rooms on campuses where students and staff can drop in and just take a brain break, breathe, listen to some pleasant music or water flowing, so that we are creating spaces that acknowledge that, sometimes we get triggered, our nervous systems are worked up. How do we respond to those behaviors? I mean, that came up earlier. A real common phrase that I hear around positive behavior interventions and supports is this idea of get curious, not furious, right? Like, we need to ask the question, this child is seeking a connection when there's a behavior challenge. So creating, calm corners in classrooms and well spaces on campus are one way of acknowledging that, we need to give one another space for that kind of focus on well-being.
You mentioned how much is being expected of schools. They're being expected and asked to do so much. But of all the things that they're being asked to do, why is a focus on attendance, chronic absenteeism, and dropout prevention so important?
Well, I think that's a pretty easy question to answer. I mean, ultimately, the whole reason why we exist as educators is to ensure that our children get a high quality education, that they're prepared and able to graduate and go out into the world, whether they start working or they go on to college. That's our ultimate goal. So if we're not looking at chronic absenteeism, that is one of the highest indicators that leads to students dropping out and disengaging, then we're never going to reach our goal of ensuring that all of our children graduate and have success in their lives. So it is absolutely one of the most important things we do as educators, is make sure that children are attending, because obviously children cannot learn if they're not sitting in that classroom in front of that teacher. You could have the best, highest quality teacher in the world, but if that child isn't able to come to school, they're not going to learn.
Is there any other things that I didn't ask you about that you'd like to share?
I would just bring it together and, kind of summarize all of this that we talked about. And I think, one of the most important things that a district can do to improve attendance is, one, to make it a priority across the board, to collect and analyze data so they have a true understanding of what their attendance looks like, who is struggling the most when it comes to attendance, setting very clear expectations and targets of what is the expectation around attendance. Because you can talk to a kindergarten parent and a high school parent and ask them, what do you think good attendance is? And they'll give you complete different answers. You know, one person might think if I go to school 3 days a week, that's good attendance. That's most of the week. You know, and that simply is not acceptable. So you have to have clear expectations, clear targets that you want to meet. You have to implement strategies and programs that are going to address the students that need it the most and the challenges that you've identified through your data collection. And then you have to hold everyone accountable. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. I mean the bus driver, the classroom teacher, the teacher's assistant, the cafeteria worker, the principal, the district administrators, all the way up to the superintendent. We all have to be held accountable. And also part of that accountability is on parents and on students and all of the other agencies that serve children and families collectively looking at our children and deciding that we are going to make an investment in our children in LA County to make sure that they're getting what they need to be able to be healthy, to be able to thrive, and to be able to do well in school.
And as we close, and I'll start with you, Alicia, and then turn it over to Dr. Duardo for the final word. With all your years of experience, what words of encouragement might you give to the people out there in the field working with students, working with schools, trying to make a difference in this area?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I think one of the most important things from my viewpoint is to be positive about the work, to ensure that our focus is on promotion of attendance, which again relates back to climate and relationships and sense of belonging. And we all benefit from that. Staff also need a sense of belonging and connectedness and joy at school. So the conditions that we create, how important those are. The other thing very clearly that Dr. Duardo has spoken to is use of data, that we really have to pay attention to what's going on and not just look at it a couple times a semester, but look at it, as frequently as daily or weekly if possible, so that we can respond in real time. We can't wait for bad outcomes. We need to get proactive. So what systems do you have in place? And what are those tiered supports? You really need to map that out. Again, how are we promoting attendance? How do you identify when a student may be struggling or a group of students by grade level or other factors? And then having positive supports that are, tier 3 intensive individualized supports that can help address the students who those supports are not working for, if that makes sense. So the work is hard and it's gotten harder with COVID. Again, we don't want to encourage students to attend school with the slightest sign of illness. I recognize that poses its own challenge. Many districts have been very creative in setting up systems for short-term independent study and other opportunities to try to minimize that instructional time loss. But to the extent that it's possible, building out those strategies and seeking support, right? Contacting us, the County Office of Education. We have a Child Welfare and Attendance, a CWA cafe that we host that helps, problem solve with districts around the child welfare and attendance topics of their interest. So we encourage you also to reach out to us so that we can be of service to you.
I would say that certainly districts and leaders within the districts have a lot on their plate, a lot of challenges. And with this pandemic, it's only made it more difficult. But I think it's really important that we don't give up hope, that we understand that it is possible to improve student attendance, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Just showing clear compassion and empathy and building positive relationships with students and parents. When a student is absent, letting them know that you miss them and that you're so glad that they're back can mean a lot for children. Because oftentimes children will say, I feel invisible. I don't even think people notice me. So really noticing when a student is out and welcoming them back and to take advantage of all of the county departments, the county office of education, the nonprofits who want to help support schools and districts, that they're not in this alone, that this is a shared responsibility, and feeling good about and creating those type of partnerships that will help them address this issue.
Thank you both so much for your time and for participating in our first podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.